Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast for 5th of October 2023. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
I'm Peter Ryan in Montreal, Canada. And Mark, in anticipation of this weekend, I'd like to wish you and all our listeners a very happy Canadian Thanksgiving.
Well, that's fantastic. We had the Brazilian version a couple of weeks ago, and I made sure that I avoided going to the beach during that weekend because, I think it's a bit like spring break in the US or, whenever you have one of these big holidays, it's just, it's not a good time to go away to any kind of resorts, really.
No, not really. I'm like you. I tend to try and avoid travel on those very, very crazy weekends or periods of time. Now, that said, I think that here in Canada, obviously, Canadians have a reputation for being very staid and very calm. I think it'll be a weekend of turkey and pumpkin pie. And we don't actually have our own equivalent of Black Friday for our Thanksgiving in Canada, but certainly, going out and visiting a few shops will be in order too for many folks. But, I'm curious, Mark, just in terms of our interview this week, I know that you caught up with our longtime friend, Michele Rowan, who is probably one of the best minds out there when it comes to working from home. And you conducted a really interesting chat with her. What were some of the key themes that you and Michele went over?
Well, I think that, Michele was really sort of talking about where have we gone since the pandemic and how has work from home and hybrid working been accepted, particularly within the kind of CX and BPO community. Because I think that, we can all follow academics like Nick Bloom at Stanford. I certainly follow his research that he publishes on LinkedIn. Many of these people are looking at work from home in a very general way, but what Michele seems to focus on is really within our community of how does it affect BPO, how does it affect CX, and how do we see hybrid being adopted across different organizations? Because one thing that we've seen again, it's like about 2 years since Michele came on the podcast, and it was early 2021 when she was on the podcast, and at that point she was saying we have to accept that work from home is now going to be an ongoing reality after the pandemic, and I think that what she said then was definitely it's been proven, but what we've seen is that different companies have found different ways to adopt it. Nobody is really sort of saying 100% back in the office or 100% work from home. There's always a sort of mix somewhere in the middle. And I think that's one of the really interesting points is how are different companies handling this on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, it's funny. The whole hybrid thing has been a point of discussion literally for a couple of years now. And I do think that we're starting to see some type of clarity in terms of a strategy or a blueprint that organizations need to think about when they try and implement it within the scope of their own CX operations. But let's be perfectly blunt here too. There is no magic bullet. There's no one size fits all solution. It's got to adapt to a particular organization from the standpoint of the vertical that the company is in. It's got to adapt to company culture. It's got to adapt to what executives around the boardroom table are comfortable with themselves. But I'm glad that we are getting to this point where it's becoming an accepted way of conducting CX in a quality manner, and getting insights from people like Michele who really eat, live, and breathe this subject is so valuable.
Yeah, and I saw a news story just today as we're recording this that said about half of parents in Europe are really struggling when their employer is moving from being very flexible to asking them to be back in the office most of the time. And so I think that, that just sort of demonstrates that people have adapted and changed their kind of family routines and the way that they look after their kids or pick them up from school. And I think that people don't want to go back to a really very rigid structure. Obviously, they've still got to put the hours in, they've got to get the work done. But, if you need a 2-hour break to pick your kids up from school and then you're going to work a bit later because of that, I think that nowadays people want that kind of flexibility built into their job. And that's all part of the research that Michele's been doing and that she talks about in the interview.
Well, it's going to be a great discussion. So why don't we go right to hear what you and Michele spoke about in this week's episode of the CX Files.
Hi, Michele. It's great to get you back on the podcast. Now, it's been over 2 years since you were a guest on this pod, and that was May 21. So it was immediately after the kind of, well, the worst part of the pandemic with the kind of stay-at-home orders and everything. And I remember then, the theme was you were telling everybody work from home is here to stay. It's not just an emergency response. So what's your judgment now on that prediction?
Yeah, hi, Mark, and it's nice to be back with you. I think it's pretty evident that in the contact center environment and beyond, the prediction has held true. I estimate that currently 90% of US contact centers are utilizing work from home in some capacity, some percentage of their population, and 60% of those companies in the US are now fully at home or nearly fully at home. The balance of them are using some kind of mix, some kind of hybrid approach.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting. So it seems that there's been a permanent change.
Yes, definitely. A much higher stick rate post-pandemic with work from home. I mean, work from home has been around in the contact center environment for the past 10 or 15 years, but it was used as a staffing strategy and a retention strategy for most companies for some percentage of their population, and now it's a workplace strategy. It's something that's being largely voiced, let's put it that way.
I remember as everything kicked off in 2020, and I think Teleperformance is probably one of the biggest companies in the industry, more than 400,000 agents. But before COVID, they only had a few thousand. It was just a couple of thousand people doing permanent work from home, and they had to shift to everybody working from home. So it was massive.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been big pickup on the BPO side, I think, for fixed permanent work from home as well. I mean, there's work to be done there because BPOs often have customers and clients that they have to work through contracts with and refresh those contracts. I work with a lot of those clients that BPOs have, and there's work that needs to be done to update their agreements to reflect approval of contract workers working from home and employees working from home and those sorts of logistics. Yeah.
Okay, well, I wanted to mention a new book that's it's got my name on the cover alongside Terry Rybolt and Brian Pritchard from Live Exchange. Now, that's entirely focused on flexible organizations using GigCX. And in your introduction to the book, you mentioned that work from home actually goes far beyond just CX and BPO companies. Do you think is that something that those of us who are kind of CX and contact center focused, we sometimes miss, that many of the trends we're sort of talking about and looking at are actually changing work much more generally?
Oh, yeah, I think that's definitely the case. The trends of where we hire people, whether that's local or long distance, who we hire, whether it's employees or seasonal workers or contractors, and where people work are not unique to contact centers or BPOs. I mean, these are now priorities for most businesses that they have to sort out today because the pandemic changed much of our work world and it changed the preferences of workers, and that's being strongly voiced. I mean, we see that across every industry. I certainly do. You probably do too. And I mean, people want two things. They want location flexibility and they want schedule flexibility.
Yeah, and I remember that one of the things you said in the foreword was that people are not just quitting jobs to get another job in another cubicle, but they're actually looking for more flexibility. And so do you think that that's something that's come out of the work from home experiment we saw during the pandemic, that we're not just seeing the same sort of work structure, but at home instead of an office, but now there's a new sense of flexibility requirement?
Yeah, I do, because I think it opened people's eyes in terms of what is possible. and where they could work and where they can be productive and where they can, better balance their personal preferences and their personal life with their work life, right? It proved all that stuff out during the pandemic and prompted people to think differently about what would work best for them professionally and personally and enable that balance. So yeah, I definitely think that was kind of the trigger.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, you've worked in the past with Nick Bloom at Stanford University, I know, and Nick Bloom is probably one of the best known academic commentators on work from home, and he just commented this week, just as we're recording this, that he thinks we're now looking at a kind of Nike swoosh, that there's a sort of a post-pandemic small dip, but then very strong growth. The age of the office being dominant is over. And so does this reflect what you've seen in your own work and the organizations that you work with?
Yeah, definitely. And by the way, Nick Bloom is not reporting on what contact center workers are doing. He is collecting and sharing and organizing and sharing data around remote and hybrid practices around the globe and across all industries. So that's what he's reporting on. And yes, to answer your question, I see that same swoosh. Obviously when we were all forced to work from home, that's when the numbers were the biggest. And now I see a bit of a pullback. I think in the contact center industry, it's related to organizations that are committed to long-term real estate arrangements. And those organizations have a tendency to ask people to be in the office more frequently because they want to utilize that capital investment that they have. Once those come up for renewal or release, I think we're going to see another lift. And we'll see more people being able to achieve their preferences, which is, for those that want to do more work from home and more hybrid.
Yeah, that's interesting because I saw just this week, Meta, the owner of Facebook, they just gave up an office. They leased a new office in London to be their European headquarters in 2021. They haven't even occupied the place yet, and they just spent more than $100 million to get out of the lease. So they basically decided that this enormous European head office wasn't going to work for them anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a very large insurance company, a health insurance company in the United States that just went through the same thing. They had just built a new headquarters and finished it before the pandemic hit. And now they have given up trying to, lure people. They were never forcing people back into the office, but they've given up trying to lure people back into the office. And they're just going to repurpose that space. They're probably going to sell it, and they're building something else that will be more multi-use and multifunctional, an event kind of space for meaningful gatherings and those kinds of things. So yeah, good examples.
Yeah. And I think the real estate question is interesting because I just saw some office occupancy figures this week as well.
Yeah.
London is about 32%. New York, it kind of depends on the borough you're talking about, but it goes from about 22 to even the maximum is less than half occupied. And across the US, I think the average is about 50% occupied. So how are we going to see downtown areas adapt to this if so many professional office workers are going to stay working from home?
Yeah, I think cities are going to have to do, and towns are going to have to do a lot of rework on their downtown areas. We're already starting to see office buildings being repurposed in urban areas to apartment complexes, condos, other shared kind of living spaces, community spaces. And the other thing that I see going on is that, lunch and dinner spots are being converted into more evening entertainment centers to draw in and attract people that are going to be spending time in those urban areas, because it's not going to be daytime workers 5 days a week anymore. We know that. Yeah.
I saw a European survey of cultural institutions. So it was the people running galleries, art exhibitions, and museums. All this kind of stuff. And they're actually now worried about it because they don't have the footfall walking past and into those museums. And it seems the obvious answer would be we'll focus more on the tourists because you're not going to get that Monday to Friday footfall.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Maybe we may see a lot more extended stay sort of spaces get converted as well. Maybe the hotels will make bigger investments as well, but certainly to draw the urban people, urban livers back to the cities. I'm already seeing those conversions taking place in New York, and Denver in particular is a big one, and out west.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier as well that it's not just about work from home only. There's also the hybrid model. Many companies have just sort of entered a new kind of organizational structure where they're very flexible about whether you stay at home or visit the office. But there seems to be as many different rules around how this works as there are companies. Some are insisting on specific days in the office. Some are insisting on notice. Before you visit the office, you have to sort of inform people you're going to be there, so other people can book meetings and stuff. I mean, have you seen the companies that you work with? Have you seen them struggling? And are there any kind of best practices that seem to work for most people?
Yeah, every company does this differently. Many do. And I think that the way it's deployed, that hybrid is deployed, needs to be a reflection of company culture, values, and priorities. So in other words, it needs to be a reflection of what the business wants and also of what your employees want. And what that looks like this year is going to be different 2 years from now. So I think, weighing in with employees is really, really important in terms of how to structure this and how to deploy it. And I would leave it at that because there's many ways to do it well. And it should be adjusted as it evolves. I mean, these are very early days of hybrid working for everyone. Work from home is not new in the contact center environment, but hybrid work is kind of new in the contact center environment. We used to do some hoteling when we were overcrowded and needed to change out seats at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and do some change ups with things. But hybrid is new for the contact center environment too. So I think the most important thing is to align, the business objectives equally with employee preferences, not management preferences. Employee preferences. They need to be at the table with regularity and input.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways to do this, but there's
sure.
probably even more ways to get it wrong as well, I guess.
Yeah. And it's going to be a learning experience, and it'll evolve and change, just like work from home in the contact center environment has changed so much in the past decade. It really has. Now everybody is just kind of digging in to get good at this stuff. We've kind of made it through the emergency. And in the contact center environment, we've used work from home for a long time, but it's been a sidebar. It hasn't been the center stage. Now it's the center stage, work from home and hybrid, and everybody's got to get good at it. And that's going to take some time.
Has it sort of opened up new opportunities then that perhaps were not available before? Like I spoke to Terry Rybolt earlier today before we had this conversation, and he was saying, some of the interesting stuff is that you can hire people that would never go to work in a contact center. So it seems that there's a lot of opportunities to tap into these pools of talent that nobody could get access to before.
Well, yeah, for sure. We can hire people that couldn't get to physically could not get to contact centers, people with mobility issues, people that can work but need to work short shifts because of a physical disability. So they can only work 2 hours and then they need an hour off, and then they can come back and work 2 more hours. You couldn't do that in an office environment, and we can do it easily in the in a home-based environment. So yes, the labor pools are growing significantly, and the people that we can attract into these positions, and people that, new parents and people that are in other caregiving positions, and actors and writers and, teachers and real estate agents that don't want another full-time job. They don't want to get in their car and drive to a full-time job. They are happy to give you 3 hours a day, 4 days a week of their best work to do some great CX service and support with your customers, to make some extra money. And those people, they weren't even on our radar before. They weren't interested. The trick is getting in front of them, recruiting them effectively. That's important.
Yeah. So
you're not looking for call center jobs.
Yeah. So you need to find those people as well. But it seems like it's a no-brainer then for any company that's trying to improve their ESG or their diversity and inclusion. Just work with a partner that is hiring in this way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I saw some statistics today on LinkedIn where 9% of posted jobs mention fully remote or work from home, and 50% of the applications are indicating that's what they're looking for. So that's the gap. Or the competitive advantage is the better way to look at it, that you have when you're offering, fully remote jobs, or, marginally hybrid, or richly hybrid, you might want to call it. Hybrid with a lot of flexibility.
Yeah. Okay, so just to wrap up then, what's coming up for the Work From Home Alliance? Because we haven't talked for a while. So what are you doing, and what do you see going into 2024 then?
Yeah, well, I'm super excited about the stuff that we're doing. Work From Home Alliance is the place where corporate and contact center leaders can meet, people that want clear visibility of what others are doing with remote and hybrid work. So that's what we offer. We do two things. We do monthly virtual live meetings that are best practice exchanges. They always have topics assigned to them in advance, so you can know what you're signing up for. And again, those are places where leaders can share their experiences and best practices and technology investments around remote and hybrid work. And the second thing that we do is offer in-person conferences and events on remote and hybrid work for people that prefer to meet that way. So next week we have a virtual meeting coming up. The topic is employee engagement and gamification. And in November, we are meeting in Laguna Beach, California for an in-person workshop on work from home and hybrid work best practices. So that's what we've got going on. Super exciting.
All right, that's great. Well, I'll make sure we've got at least the November event listed on the show notes for you then.
Fabulous.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Michele.
Thank you. Good seeing you.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.